Hey guys, today I want to help you guys create some builds and just get familiar with being able to farm Legend and Master Lost Sectors super quickly. So in this we'll have sort of a skeleton for the basis of builds going into this, but I'm also going to talk about all the ways you should be modifying it depending on which Lost Sector it is and what the modifiers are for that day. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. Let's go ahead and get into it. So really quickly, before we actually look at the build itself, I want to just give you guys some understanding of what it is beforehand. First of all, the purpose of the build is specifically for Legend Lost Sectors or Master Lost Sectors. While it will definitely work in Grandmasters as well, I would do some tweaking to the build for that. And the reason you might want to run Master or Legend Lost Sectors is to farm out some world drop weapons, or if you're just trying to get a bunch of exotics of a specific type if you need that. That being said, it's important to remember that Master Lost Sectors are the only way to get double perked up world drops, and there are some really powerful world drops out there right now that a lot of people might be after, like the Crux Termination. So really, you're basically optimizing so that you could spend less time doing Master Lost Sectors and spend more time doing what you love, like tax evasion. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about some of the broad details of the build, and then we'll get into the specifics for each class. And first of all, that's right, this build is going to be something available for all classes, and I actually recommend being able to run all classes because what the best class is going to change based on which Lost Sector and modifiers are for a given day. If it's Void Burn, I would highly recommend running Warlock because of their access to Nova Bomb being a very powerful choice for defeating the boss at the end. However, if it's Solar Burn, then it would be more effective to use Titan or Hunter since you could use Golden Gun or Consecration with hammers on Titan. Remember, Consecration can be pretty ridiculous, but Prismatic Titan just has some questionable survivability, so ultimately if you're having trouble staying alive on Titan, then you might want to try Hunter, but if you can go fast on Titan, you can go very fast on Titan. Can't believe that we got Glass Cannon Titans before we got GTA 6. One last thing to note is that because the weapon is heavily dependent on a kinetic trench barrel shotgun, you're going to want to have your super matching the elements for the surges of that day. It seems to always be Arc Surge, or at least very frequently, and it seems to be rotating back and forth between Void and Solar. So, because Arc Supers kind of suck overall, I would just use the Void or Solar ones and then play the correct class to have those. But now let's go ahead and get into all of these specific builds and start off with looking at Warlock. So with Warlocks, you're pretty much just going to be doing the normal Warlock hard content build of Devour and Stasis turrets. As for your exotics, you could go with Getaway Artist if you want to be simple and boring and you don't want to have to farm for the exotic class item. However, you could also go for example, a Starter Scales and Necrotic class item. And the Starter Scales can actually help one-shot bosses that otherwise wouldn't be able to be one-shotted by the Nova Bomb. Some of the bosses have more health than others, some of them will just be insta-killed by the Nova Bomb, others will be able to tank it, and Starters might be the difference between doing that or not doing that. And Necrotics are just overall very nice for a little bit of ad clear and also being able to apply a little bit of extra damage on top of your melees, keep the Unravel going, and it can even add some damage to barriers and such while you're pracking Trench Barrel. As for the actual abilities, I highly recommend running the Arcane Needle. Basically, you get 3 charges, it's a ranged melee, it's very versatile, you can always hit targets, you can use it to get Radiant, which allows you to not even need a barrier weapon. Hilariously, the Warlock version of this build does not actually need the Relic at all to function. You could do the entire Lost Sector without the Relic. However, the Relic can definitely speed things up with stuff like Shield Crust and Expanding Abyss, allowing you to just do even more damage. As for your grenade, you basically get to pick between either the Storm Grenade or the Vortex Grenade. If you're using Getaway Artists, you obviously have to use the Storm Grenade. However, the Vortex Grenade can be nice for applying Weaken while you're not Transcendent. It can be helpful for taking out the champions faster or for dealing with the boss if you don't happen to have Transcendence, because you do want to weaken the boss before popping your Nova Bomb on them. As for the super, I would recommend either Song of Flame, or Nova Bomb, or Needle Storm, depending on the surges of that given day. Basically, these are the 3 supers that I would consider to be actually good on Warlock. The Stasis one and the Arc one are questionable at best, and I would ultimately just pick one that happens to match up with the surges for the given day of the Legend Lost Sector, so that you can get increased damage on your kinetic weapon. Then you just run the normal suite of fragments, which are almost identical on every class, the main ones being Dawn and Protection, so that you can get Radiant on melees, and get that nice free passive damage resistance just for being surrounded, which is a constant with such an aggressive build. Lastly, we'll talk about the weapon choices on Warlock. They're going to be pretty similar on Hunter, and then they'll change a little bit on Titan at the end, if you are watching for all 3. Basically, the loadout is going to be a kinetic trench barrel shotgun. My choice is either Imperial Decree or the Perfect Paradox that just came out. These are both great options. The Imperial Decree is going to have more total damage if you're running out of ammo. However, if you're able to use it effectively, the Perfect Paradox can definitely kill things much faster with its higher burst DPS. Following that, you're going to want to have an Ergo Sum with the Arc Conductor perk. Almost any frame works, however the ideal frame is the wave frame just so that you can fly around in wacky patterns while you're killing the enemies. However, I ended up settling for lightweight, which does just fine. Basically, the less ammo it uses to proc the perk, and the faster you can proc it, the better. And lastly, your heavy weapon is going to be either a machine gun or a rocket launcher depending on the lost sector. Basically, if there is a lot of floating crap that you're not going to be able to hit with your shotgun, you're going to want to have a machine gun so that you have a barrier option. Basically, you just chunk a melee and then shoot the machine gun, and their barrier will come up before you run out of radiant. The same can be said with trench barrel. When you're using your shotgun, all you have to do is toss a melee and shoot them with your shotgun, and you got trench barrel and radiant applied at the same time, and you'll be able to melt the boss super fast. And that's going to cover Warlock, so now let's go ahead and switch over to Hunter. And the Hunter version of the build is probably the closest to the Grandmaster version as well. However, with this one, you really don't have as much reliance on the exotic class item. You could still definitely use it for even more survivability, but honestly, with the scaling being easier, I didn't feel the need to use that, and instead ended up just using Celestial Nighthawk to one-shot the boss at the end. But if you are having survivability issues, maybe you're on a lower light level or something like that, you could definitely use the Seared Arachnes class item so that way you can get more woven mail throughout. That being said, I think Hunter is in a bit of an odd spot when it comes to these Master and Legend Lost sectors, because honestly I think that Warlock and Titan can do most of them more optimally given the correct circumstances. Hunter basically requires a Solar Surge to be active, because if Void Surge is active, you're definitely going to be better off running Nova Bomb on Warlock. However, when Solar Surge is active, you could be using Consecration on Titan, which is going to be the setup we're going to be talking about on Titan next. That being said, Hunter is still definitely more consistent and safe than Titan, so if you're having issues with that, then I would recommend Hunter, or if you just only have a Hunter, this is definitely the best way to play it. Pretty much, you just run the Golden Gun Super. If you're stuck on a Void Surge activity, you could use Tether instead, although you might want to take the class item instead of Orpheus Rigs or something like that. That way you can have Woven Mail to get a decent survivability verb, because remember, while Restoration with Golden Gun is pretty good, the Void Overshield from Facet of Purpose on a Void subclass is not so good. After that, you've got basically two choices for the melee, either the Threaded Spike or the Withering Blade. The advantages between the two are basically that the Withering Blade has more charges and can overload enemies, so if you have overload bad guys, then you can make use of that. They can even help to freeze if you do a dodge and shuriken combo, or just throw two melees and you can get a freeze, which will stop unstops as well. However, the advantage of the Threaded Spike is that it has much stronger ag clear, as it is able to bounce between a lot of targets. And another nice thing is that it weakens any enemies that it doesn't kill, so if you throw it at something like a champion, it won't just instantly melt you once it comes back alive. After that, I recommend using the Grapple Grenade. Basically, this is just another way for you to proc Trench Barrel and get Radiant. And the Gambler's Dodge so that you can keep the melees coming, because this is a pretty heavily oriented melee build. And in the same case as Warlock, I don't think you need any changes to the fragments, they are very similar. The only one being different is that you don't need Facet of Dominance on Hunter like you would want to have on Warlock, and I'll have the build links in the description with all of these, so they'll already be set up for you. And for the aspects, I would recommend running the Stylish Executioner and Winter's Shroud for a bunch of invis spam and a little bit of extra overload and unstop. And lastly, the weapons, pretty much the same as Warlock. It's going to be your Kinetic Trench Barrel Shotgun, either the Perfect Paradox or the Imperial Decree, and again with the Ergo Sum Arc Frame, and the Machine Gun or Rocket, depending on the circumstance. And lastly, let's go ahead and talk about Titans. Now, ever since Final Shape dropped, I've basically been poo-pooing on Titans for being, honestly, the weakest class in the game. However, there is pretty much one exception to that, and that is that they have a very powerful glass cannon setup for difficult roam content, which is exactly what this is, the same as Grandmaster Strikes. And I find it absolutely hilarious that the Titan is what ended up with the glass cannon build of all of them, but it's actually a ton of fun and really satisfying to use, and it lets you clear things super quickly as long as you make good use of it and you're just good at the game. And that is of course going to be using the Consecration Knockout setup. This has already been shared around quite a bit, but just to give you a refined build for it with the context of Master and Legend Lost sectors, Pretty much we're going to be using hammers or the Void Super depending on the surge for the given day. Remember, it's typically going to be Arc, Void, or Solar. The problem with Void being that you only get Void Overshield, and Titan's only real survivability comes from Facet of Purpose, otherwise you just get the little chunk of healing from Knockout. And unless you have the Spirit of Assassin like I do on my class item, you're just not going to be able to have a lot of survivability without having Restoration on orbs. Outside of that, not having Solar Burn on Consecration would also hurt it, and I think ultimately just put the ball back in Warlock's court for being the fastest class. But Consecration is absolutely ridiculous when mixed with Synthoceps. It's pretty much able to one-shot every single type of champion in the game right now. For Unstop and Overload, you do have to stun it first, but once you do that, they're going to be one-shotted, and barriers will just be taken out straight away since they don't have any damage resistance or healing. And because of this shift in having so much damage from our abilities versus what we had on Hunter and Warlock, we actually don't end up using the Trench Barrel Shotgun to carry our damage. We use Consecration. That being said, it does mean that if there is a lost sector going on with a lot of flying enemies, you are going to have problems. In the one in the background, the only flying enemies are just the two at the end, so I deem it still okay, but if you can do something that is a fast lost sector that also doesn't have flying enemies at all, you're going to be very fast on Titan as long as you're playing it effectively. So we've already covered a few of the abilities on Titan, but let's go ahead and look into the rest. The first one being our choice of our melee, and we are going to be using the Frenzy Blade just so that we can have multiple charges on it. Frenzy Blade itself is decent, but we're really using this to just get more consecrations because that's going to be our main use of our melee ability. As for the grenade, you could pretty much choose between either the Shackle Grenade or the Pulse Grenade while using Facet of Domination. Basically, if there's overloads, I would recommend using the Pulse Grenade with Facet of Domination to be able to stun them immediately. But if there's going to be unstops, then I would recommend using the Shackle Grenade so that you can stun them immediately with that. And it's also very effective as crowd control at just stopping things from shooting you. The fragments are once again not really changed. I'll have them in the build link below. However, mostly you're just going to be using Dawn for Radiant and Protection for more damage resist, all the normal stuff you'd expect to see on prismatic builds. And as for the weapons, as I mentioned, I ended up not even using a Trench Barrel Shotgun, instead I just brought a utility SMG. Basically the purpose of the SMG was to pop barriers, apply Slice, and to be able to heal me because it has the Chaos Reshape perk from the raid. Any good barrier weapon will work. You could even use a sniper if you did want to use double special. However, I just found the utility of the SMG to be helpful sometimes. If I ever had downtime, I could heal, and I could also proc Slice on any enemies that I know are going to be a threat to me. Anyways guys, that's pretty much going to do it for the build. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you thought about the builds below in the comments. Bye bye!